Well, in the invitation that was given out by the German government, it hoped to reach a consensus between the two warring factions of Siraj as well as Haftar. Let's not forget that while Siraj controls a time, he enjoys international backing from mainly from UN and Turkey, whereas on the other hand, Haftar, who controls a major part of Libya and has forced Siraj to get into a military confrontation on multiple occasions as well, enjoys the support of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Russia and even France. Now, talks were held earlier this month as well, where the two parties signed a ceasefire deal. However, even before the minute details of the deal could be worked out, Haftar exited from the talks, and which is why this talk is being held today in the presence of international leaders as well. But on the other hand, foreign players having an involvement in this 9-month-old clash in Libya has only complicated matters further, with many of these world leaders forced to take positions. Risen with the closure of the East Libyan oil ports as well. Well, in 2011, when a majority of Libya's oil exports had been cut off, this had propelled the international crude prices to a post-financial crisis high of above $120 per barrel. And international leaders fear that the same could be repeated this time. Another issue that needs to be focused on at the Berlin meet is, of course, the issue of refugees. Libya is often used like a transit point for the refugees coming in from the Mediterranean and to enter Europe, particularly to countries like Italy. Well, the horrific conditions in which the refugees are made to live in Libya have also made international headlines. But can a middle ground for the two warring factions is something that we have to see. So far, multiple meets have been unsuccessful in doing so. The tensions continue to peak between Siraj's internationally recognized government and, on the other hand, Haftar controlling the majority of the oil wells, reducing the crude output of Libya by almost half in the recent past, has not helped the tensions either. In fact, despite a ceasefire deal being signed between Siraj and Haftar just a few weeks back, there were confirmed reports that there was renewed fighting between the two factions. And we'll be joined in by WION correspondent Ira Spritzer, live from Berlin. Well, Ira, first of all, we'd like to ask you, we have seen such efforts being made in the past. It has not really made way for much change between Siraj's government as well as Haftar's military-backed faction. What can we see different? What can we expect different at the Berlin meet? Will that bring about some change? Will that reduce the tensions?
Well, there's certainly some hope, of course, that this Berlin conference will provide some sort of movement on the very tense situation in Libya. And we, of course, as you mentioned, saw discussions in Moscow over the past week. This is not exactly a continuation of those talks, but certainly related in the sense that both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan will be in Berlin, expected to arrive here in just a few hours. So I think what this all sort of points to is just the tremendous importance of finding a solution in Libya when you have these world leaders coming, also French President Emmanuel Macron, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, all coming to Berlin to try and at least in the first stage, sign that ceasefire deal, which wasn't agreed to in Moscow as was hoped. So that is one of the hopes for today, is to get General Haftar to sign that peace agreement effectively put on hold that 9-month siege of the capital Tripoli, which his rebel forces have been undertaking. There also are hopes to reinforce the UN arms embargo against sending arms to Libya, which has been violated many times by outside forces. So those are some of the hopes for Berlin today, but we really don't know how close the two. In the case of, for example, Russia and Turkey, with those two sort of supporters of each side, how far they might be willing to go to try and move forward with the peace process today.
Right, and the crude oil is obviously being used as a bargaining card by Haftar. What kind of a role is that expected to play? Is that only expected to heighten tensions between the two parties? What are we seeing really play out?
Well, the explanation given for the oil blockade in Libya by General Haftar's forces was that this was a response to Turkey sending in their own forces recently, in a sense, escalating the conflict. So the oil blockade was their response to Turkey's move in the situation. So I do think it does heighten tensions. The complex negotiations and the negotiating strategy, perhaps, which will be playing out here in Berlin. So it does not sound like that is a helpful development, but that is certainly the situation on the ground that all of the leaders here, as well as the leaders of the Libyan factions, will have to try and resolve, try and come to terms with if this peace process is to move forward today.
Right, and also in the last few weeks, we have seen the decision of Turkey to send in reinforcements, military reinforcement to back Sarraj against Haftar, had only escalated tensions between the two parties. So with the top international leaders coming in for the Berlin meet, who are the major players that we are expected to see act as catalysts in this tension this time around?
Right. Well, I think both Turkey and Russia and their leaders, Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, are in the hopes of de-escalating this conflict, just because those countries have been involved, especially recently in Libya. And on the Turkish side, they signed an agreement actually with the Libyan government for oil and gas exploration off the coast of the Mediterranean. So that agreement would likely not apply if General Haftar's forces were to take over the country. So Turkey now has significant financial interests in what's happening in Libya as well. But those aren't the only two countries involved. United Arab Emirates also been a major supporter of the Libyan opposition, as well as Egypt. So really a lot of external players, a lot of foreign powers very involved in Libya right now.